caught my husband's ex-wife using our son as a weapon. Hey, before we dive into this absolute family nightmare, take a quick second and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. Let's see how far this story goes. I thought winning the custody battle meant peace. I thought my husband and I could finally be a normal blended family. I was wrong. It all came crashing down at my stepson's science fair, all because of one innocent word: Mom. I followed his ex-wife into the hallway where she was sobbing, ready to apologize and fix the chaos. But what she demanded of me was unthinkable. What I agreed to felt like tearing a piece of my heart out just to make her stop crying. I went home that night and made the worst mistake a stepmom can make. But before the sun rose, I uncovered a secret that proved everything, from the tears to the court case, was a lie. A lie orchestrated by her to shatter our family. Wait until you see the note she wrote her lawyer. You will not believe what she did to her own son just to get me out of his life. My stepson, Flynn, accidentally called me mom in front of his birth mother, Sally, and she immediately accused me of stealing her child. But she didn't expect him to defend me instead, causing her face to go pale, then scarlet, before she rushed out, leaving Flynn mortified. 3 years earlier, I had married Caspian, a divorced dad, when Flynn was 8, and I'd quickly fallen for both the witty, reserved boy and his father, prioritizing my independent architectural design firm until then. Sally, Caspian's ex-wife, lived 5 hours away and saw Flynn every other long weekend, which was standard co-parenting. But their separation had been difficult, fueled by a clash between Caspian's work and Sally's need for meticulous planning. They had worked hard to remain respectful for Flynn's sake, but her intense career as a research scientist often interfered with her custodial visits. Her own challenging childhood, marked by a cold, paternal guardian who viewed her as a burden, helped me understand her sensitivity and her vow never to let another female treat her child the way she was treated, which Caspian initially thought was dramatic, but which was the first indication she saw any co-parent as an inherent threat. My main focus was making Flynn feel secure and cherished, so I let our relationship evolve organically, never pressuring him to define me or trying to replace his mother, just aiming to be a trustworthy adult who genuinely cared. Yet a small recurring observation served as an alert. Every visitation handover, Sally would make understated but sharp remarks about his jacket, glasses, or satchel, anything implying my involvement in his daily routine, like stating she consistently bought his boots a size larger because she understood how fast his feet grew, or reminding him of the gourmet meals they had prepared, just the two of them, implying she knew details I was still discovering. At first, I dismissed these as natural defensive instincts from a mother acclimatizing to sharing parental obligations. But the remarks grew more focused, with Sally making sure to tell Flynn she knew precisely what his instructors required whenever he mentioned I had helped with his history or craft projects, essentially boundary marking to establish she was foundational and I was temporary. A second development complicated everything when Flynn, who was reserved, started confiding in me about class drama, conflicts with friends, and anxieties about his advanced science class, making me his reliable listener for maturation discussions because I was female and newer to his life, lacking the complex baggage that accumulates with a long-term guardian. Caspian was delighted Flynn felt comfortable with me, but it created an intriguing dynamic where
I was becoming more central to his emotional stability system, evidenced by him knocking on our door for me specifically when he had unsettling dreams, or asking me to help him practice oral reports because I made him less anxious than his father did.
He never called me mom during this phase, usually using my first name or not addressing me at all when he needed attention. But our bond was nonetheless deepening in ways that felt genuine and wholesome. I started regularly attending his history club meetings and school showcases, cheering from the gallery and capturing visuals to send to Caspian when his work held him elsewhere. Other parents, assuming I was his mother, engaged me in conversations about our children, and while I politely corrected them that I was his stepmother, many didn't perceive much distinction. Meanwhile, Sally's remarks were escalating beyond simple observations. She began interrogating Flynn about our private discussions, asking what we talked about when Caspian wasn't nearby, and if I was providing counsel he should be discussing with her instead. When Flynn mentioned I'd helped him with some coming-of-age questions he felt awkward asking his dad about, Sally immediately called Caspian for a 45-minute conversation about appropriate limitations, insisting certain dialogues should wait until Flynn was with her so she could provide the appropriate information and perspective. Caspian countered that children don't schedule inquiries around co-parenting schedules and that Flynn was clearly benefiting from a trusted adult. But the critique was clearly exhausting him, making him stressed and cautious during handovers. I tried to remain out of the dispute, smiling politely and pivoting to neutral subjects when Sally made subtly hostile comments, and deferring to Caspian to manage the explanations, which sometimes made me feel like an invited guest instead of family. The pressure affected my connection with Flynn too. I became excessively careful about images I posted online and second-guessed simple decisions like a late curfew, knowing Sally examined everything and wondering how she'd interpret my choices. I explained my increasing guardedness to Caspian, telling him every interaction felt assessed and judged, making it difficult to be natural and spontaneous. He was annoyed her conduct was impacting our familial stability, but worried about intensifying the friction by addressing it too abruptly. I told myself I was overreacting to the constant observation, even when Sally began messaging Caspian comprehensive, detailed inquiries about Flynn's schedule, sleep time, morning meal, project assistance, instructor contact, and more. Caspian, who had managed her intense involvement since before the divorce, initially responded thoroughly, viewing her focus as dedicated parenting, even if excessive. However, her questions became more pointed and frequent, wanting specifics about house regulations, guidance methods, and even details of our marriage that weren't relevant to Flynn's well-being, like whether we disagreed in front of him. My colleagues and brothers suggested I was being hypersensitive and that Sally would relax once she recognized I wasn't undermining her, assuring me that blended families always required time and adjustment. But the ceaseless questioning was eroding my confidence and making me feel monitored in my own home. The situation reached a critical point when Sally started contacting Flynn directly to ask detailed questions about his day, meals, activities, and feelings while he was supposed to be enjoying time with his father's side of the family. These calls lasted 30 to 45 minutes and left him feeling interrogated and worried about providing the expected answers. Watching him pace our living room one evening, looking drained and stressed after detailing his dinner and assignment status, I finally grasped that Sally's need to oversee and control wasn't just affecting me. He never called me mom during this phase, usually using my first name or not addressing me at all when he needed attention. But our bond was nonetheless deepening in ways that felt genuine and wholesome. I started regularly attending his history club meetings and school showcases, cheering from the gallery and capturing visuals to send to Caspian when his work held him elsewhere. Other parents, assuming I was his mother, engaged me in conversations about our children, and while I politely corrected them that I was his stepmother, many didn't perceive much distinction. Meanwhile, Sally's remarks were escalating beyond simple observations. She began interrogating Flynn about our private discussions, asking what we talked about when Caspian wasn't nearby, and if I was providing counsel he should be discussing with her instead. When Flynn mentioned I'd helped him with some coming-of-age questions he felt awkward asking his dad about, Sally immediately called Caspian for a 45-minute conversation about appropriate limitations, insisting certain dialogue should wait until Flynn was with her so she could provide the appropriate information and perspective. Caspian countered that children don't schedule inquiries around co-parenting schedules, and that Flynn was clearly benefiting from a trusted adult. But the critique was clearly exhausting him, making him stressed and cautious during handovers. I tried to remain out of the dispute, smiling politely and pivoting to neutral subjects when Sally made subtly hostile comments, and deferring to Caspian to manage the explanations, which sometimes made me feel like an invited guest instead of family. It was placing enormous pressure on Flynn to be a perfect child who never gave his mother a reason to question his welfare in our home. All I desired was to cherish this kid and help him feel secure in our blended family. But somehow it became a careful dance around someone else's anxieties. Example number 1 was minor but hard to ignore when I found Flynn tearful after a weekend visit. He had enthusiastically told Sally about learning basic cooking from me, Ilara, but she reacted with weeping, claiming she had always intended to teach him those recipes and that I had ruined those special mother-child moments by getting there first. She clarified that by acquiring these skills from me, he had taken something precious from their relationship, leaving Flynn heartbroken and causing him to ask if he should pretend not to know how to cook, or if he should stop cooking with me to avoid more conflicts. This 11-year-old was attempting to manage adult emotional turmoil and safeguard everyone's feelings by restricting his own development. Feeling remorseful for enjoying our time because his mother made him feel like his growth was a betrayal. When Caspian called Sally, she shifted the blame, stating if Ilara was truly concerned about Flynn's well-being, she'd be more cautious about not intruding on experiences that belong to his actual parent, calling artisan skills intimate connection activities reserved for biological mothers and children, and the word actual stung me. Example number 2 made denial harder when Flynn started asking questions that revealed his confusion and distress about family arrangements. He wanted to know if loving me meant he loved his mom less, as if affection were a limited resource that had to be allocated between competing adults. And he wondered if enjoying time with me made his mom unhappy or if he should feel guilty about anticipating our outings. He even asked if I'd still be his stepmom if his parents got back together. Then, relieved when I assured him Caspian and I were permanently partnered, asked if that meant his mom would always be sad about not having the family she used to have. These weren't questions a child should ask. They demonstrated that Sally's emotional reactions were creating deep apprehension about his place in both homes and his right to form natural bonds with caring adults. The most heart-wrenching question came on a quiet Harvest Day morning, when he asked if his mom would be happier if I wasn't part of their family anymore, and whether Caspian would understand if I relocated to make things easier for everyone. This child was contemplating sacrificing relationships that brought him happiness and stability to manage an adult's emotional reactions beyond his influence. Caspian was growing frustrated too, but was hesitant to generate more conflict that might jeopardize their visitation arrangement, worried about making things worse by confronting Sally too forcefully. Yet something had to change when Flynn started having physical distress symptoms, stomach knots before going to his mom's estate, and quiet behavior before transitions, clearly anxious about navigating emotional booby traps. I suggested perhaps I should withdraw from certain activities until Sally felt more secure, but Caspian was strongly opposed, arguing that rewarding her unjustified conduct with compromises would only encourage escalation and teach Flynn that love was conditional and had to be concealed. We were trapped in an impossible situation, and example number 3 ended the debate about whether Sally's behavior was typical when she appeared at Flynn's academy unannounced to check on his progress during a week when he was officially in our custody, which perplexed the instructor because Caspian hadn't authorized any school presence. When the academy called to confirm Sally was permitted to meet with Flynn's instructor,
they discovered she'd been calling regularly to ask about his conduct, evaluations, and social interactions during periods when he was in our care. She'd also been asking instructors whether Flynn ever mentioned me, what he said about our household, and whether his academic performance differed during weeks with his dad versus weeks with her. The school advisor contacted Caspian to express alarm that Flynn was being placed in the center of adult disagreements, noting he seemed nervous about discussing home life and was reluctant to mention activities involving me, even in casual settings. This was when I understood Sally wasn't just anxious. She was actively monitoring and scrutinizing his interactions with me through third parties, viewing our home like a danger zone, requiring oversight and control. Caspian was enraged about the unsanctioned visits and calls and contacted his solicitor about amending their visitation agreement to include clauses about school communication and limits around monitoring Flynn's life in both households. But before official action could be taken, I discovered something that altered everything. While tidying Caspian's study, I found a dossier labeled co-parenting records that contained legal documents I'd never seen before. These papers, dating back to before Caspian and I had even met, revealed that Sally had attempted to secure primary guardianship, arguing that Caspian's extensive travel made him an unsuitable primary parent. What made my pulse run cold was Caspian's counter-argument. He had claimed Sally was emotionally unstable and had been seeing a mental health specialist for what his lawyer described as obsessive and restrictive behaviors regarding Flynn. The documents included a mandated psychological assessment, which noted concerns about her difficulty accepting that the child could form healthy bonds with other caregivers, and recommended continued therapy to address anxiety and control issues that might hinder co-parenting. There were pages of documented incidents where Sally had become excessively distressed about normal childhood activities, such as Flynn enjoying time with sitters or forming friendships, with the evaluator specifically noting that Sally seemed to view any positive relationship in Flynn's life as a threat to her maternal bond. Most shocking of all was a letter from Sally's own therapist to the court, stating she struggled with abandonment fears stemming from her own childhood, which manifested as efforts to control and restrict her child's relationships with others. And Caspian had never shared any of this with me. The final document was the most recent, a letter from Sally's current lawyer to Caspian's attorney, dated just 4 weeks earlier, outlining a new strategy to challenge our visitation arrangement. Instead of claiming Caspian was neglectful, they planned to argue that I was creating parental manipulation by encouraging Flynn to view me as a substitute maternal figure, intending to compile evidence of my inappropriate boundary violations, including sworn statements from Academy personnel and documentation of Flynn calling me Mom. But the most shocking part was a handwritten note fastened to the back of the letter, apparently from Sally to her attorney. Elora doesn't know that Flynn started calling her Mom because I told him to. I suggested it during one of our phone calls, hoping she'd be careless enough to encourage it instead of correcting him. Now we have proof that she's trying to replace me. I sat in Caspian's study staring at that note, trying to absorb what I was reading. Sally had manipulated her own son into calling me Mom as part of a legal strategy to prove I was overstepping boundaries. Every time Flynn had used the word Mom, and I'd responded naturally, the sincere moments when he'd run to me after a bad dream, introduced me to his friends as my mom, Alara, or written a family day card addressed to the best mom, I'd been unknowingly participating in her scheme. She had been willing to confuse and manipulate her own child's emotions to construct a legal defense. My hands were trembling as I photographed every document in the dossier, needing proof and demanding an explanation from Caspian for concealing all of this. When he came home, I slid the printouts toward him, and his face went ashen as I confronted him.
You knew she was manipulating Flynn into calling me mom. You knew she was preparing a legal case against me, and you didn't think I deserved to know any of this? Caspian slumped into a chair, saying quietly, I was trying to safeguard you. If you'd known what she was doing, it would have changed how you behaved around Flynn. You might have started correcting him or withdrawing from him, which is exactly what she desired. I counted that he had let me function thinking I was cultivating a genuine relationship, when actually I was being entrapped. But Caspian insisted, your relationship with Flynn is genuine. What Sally suggested might have planted the seed, but Flynn's feelings for you are authentic. Children don't fake the level of connection he has to you. I pulled my hands away, demanding to know why he hadn't informed me about the guardianship assessment and her history of attempting to regulate his relationships. He explained, because I hoped things would be different with you. Her therapist indicated she was making progress, and I thought maybe having some distance and seeing Flynn content in our home would help her accept that he could love more people without loving her less. I noted that she had instead intensified into actively undermining our relationship, and he apologized for not warning me what we were facing. I then pointed out the recent letter, which revealed she was planning a new guardianship challenge, asserting I was alienating Flynn from her. Caspian's jaw tightened as he reviewed the attorney's letter, stating, This is preposterous. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with Flynn can see that we foster his relationship with his mother. But I reminded him we only had proof that her son called me mom, exactly what she had aimed for. The implications were tremendous. Every genuine moment between Flynn and I had been weaponized. When I asked, what do we do next, Caspian stated, we obtain our own attorney, we chronicle everything. Her manipulation, her unauthorized academy visits, her attempts to control Flynn's relationships, and we hope that a magistrate can perceive beyond her strategies. The crucial question then became, but what about Flynn? How do we tell him that his mother has been using him as a tool in a legal battle? Caspian immediately responded, we don't. He's 11 years old. He doesn't need to know that his mother manipulated him. It would shatter his trust in all of us. I understood his rationale, but keeping this secret felt like another deception, questioning how we could have an honest relationship with Flynn while hiding something this significant. Caspian concluded, we shield Flynn from adult conflicts that aren't his duty to resolve, but we also prepare to defend our family against someone who's willing to use her own child as a weapon. The next few weeks were a struggle of legal consultations and strategic planning. Our solicitor, a woman named Rhiannon who specialized in volatile guardianship cases, reviewed Sally's history and gravely shook her head. She called it parental alienation, but stated Sally was the one manipulating the child's emotions and relationships for her own agenda. Rhiannon explained that Sally's strategy, encouraging Flynn to use maternal language with me, Ilara, then asserting I was promoting inappropriate boundaries, was common among parents with excessive control issues, allowing her to depict herself as the victim protecting her child from an intrusive step-parent. The challenge, Rhiannon warned, was that proving manipulation is harder than proving the behavior she's complaining about. And a magistrate might see a child calling his stepmother mom and assume boundary issues, regardless of the behavior's origin. We spent hours preparing our counterargument, detailing every positive interaction we fostered between Flynn and his mother, but I was struggling to interact naturally with Flynn while knowing about Sally's deception. Every time he called me mom, I questioned if it was genuine affection or conditioned behavior, and every tender moment felt contaminated by the awareness that his mother had orchestrated it for tactical purposes. Rhiannon noticed my increasing reserve and confronted me, saying, "You're pulling away from him. He's beginning to notice and it's unsettling him." I admitted, I don't know what's real anymore, and asked how I could genuinely respond to him calling me mom when I knew his mother prompted it. Caspian insisted that even if she planted the idea, Flynn's feelings were still authentic,
urging me to observe how the boy sought me out when he was scared or upset. The loyalty test came to a climax the following weekend during one of Flynn's visits with Sally. He returned home distressed and perplexed, saying directly, "Mom wants me to stop calling you Mom." He explained she said it hurt her feelings and made her think he didn't love her anymore. Sally was now trying to reverse the behavior she promoted, putting Flynn in an impossible dilemma. When I gently asked what he told her, he replied, "I told her that I love her and I love you too, and that calling you Mom doesn't mean she's not my actual mom." But she started crying and said that if I really loved her, I'd understand why it makes her sad. My heart broke for this child being compelled to navigate loyalty tests. When I asked what made him most comfortable, Flynn said, "I want to keep calling you Mom because that's how I think of you, but I don't want to make her weep anymore." Caspian immediately knelt down and told him, "Buddy, the adults in your life are responsible for handling their own emotions. You don't have to change how you address people you care for just to make someone else feel better." But Flynn's tearful question, "But what if she gets so distressed that she doesn't want to be my mom anymore?" revealed the heartbreaking extent of Sally's manipulation. The child believed his natural affections were hazardous. I made a resolution in that moment, telling him, "I need you to know that no matter what you call me, Mom, Ilara, or anything else, it doesn't change how much I love you or how important you are to me. And your mother will always be your mother, no matter what anyone else does or says." Flynn seemed reassured, but I could still see him bearing the burden of attempting to keep everyone satisfied. That night I told Caspian, "We must tell him. Not everything, but something. He's carrying so much guilt and anxiety about his natural feelings, and he deserves to understand that he's not responsible for rectifying adult problems." Caspian was reluctant, but ultimately consented that Flynn needed some age-appropriate explanation of why the adults in his life were having such intense reactions to normal family dynamics. The conversation we had with Flynn the next day was one of the hardest of my life. We explained in simple terms that sometimes when families change, adults need time to adjust to new relationships. We told him that his mother was worried about making sure he knew she would always be his mom, and that worry was making her sad when she heard him call other people mom too. We assured him that having multiple people in his life who cared about him was a good thing, and that he never needed to hide his feelings or change how he expressed love to protect adult emotions. Most importantly, we told him that whatever happened with custody or legal issues, nothing would change the fact that both Caspian and I were committed to being part of his life for as long as he wanted us there. Flynn listened carefully and seemed relieved to finally have some explanation for the tension, asking, "So it's not my fault that Mom gets sad when I call Alara Mom?" Caspian firmly promised him, "It's absolutely not your fault. Adults are responsible for their own feelings, and you don't have to choose between loving me and loving her. You never have to choose." I reinforce this, saying, love isn't like pizza, where there are only so many slices to go around. You can love as many people as you want without running out. For the first time in weeks, Flynn smiled a genuine, relaxed smile. Our relief was short-lived because Sally's legal strategy was just getting started. Even though we'd only tried to protect Flynn, Sally found out Caspian had spoken to his lawyer and immediately called to accuse us of trying to limit her access to her son. She threatened to petition for modified custody, claiming I was alienating Flynn from his mother and Caspian was allowing it by not setting appropriate boundaries. These accusations were devastating because they were the reverse of reality. Sally was creating the alienation by making Flynn feel guilty about caring for me, but she framed my presence as the problem rather than her reaction to it. She started reaching out to other people in Flynn's life, including teachers, coaches, and other parents, expressing concerns about his well-being during time with his father's family, using leading questions about behavioral changes to plant seeds of doubt. People I trusted began to take her side without understanding the full situation. Flynn's soccer coach suggested we needed to communicate better. My own mother started asking questions about whether I was moving too fast based on concerns she'd heard from Sally's extended family. And even Caspian's parents began making subtle suggestions about respecting the biological parent's feelings. Flynn could sense the tension and started walking on eggshells around me, afraid that showing affection would cause more problems with his mom, making me feel like I was being erased from his life to appease someone else's insecurity. The frustrating situation turned expensive when Sally hired a family law attorney and officially filed for modified custody, claiming Flynn's best interests weren't being served in an environment where inappropriate parental boundaries were maintained. She wasn't seeking to reduce Caspian's custody time, but to require limited involvement from me in parenting decisions, mandate that all school communication go through her as primary parent, and demand court-ordered family counseling to address what her lawyer called parental role confusion and loyalty conflicts allegedly harming Flynn's emotional development. Now, it wasn't just hurt feelings. It was legal fees, court hearings, and the possibility that our family structure could be legally restricted based on one person's inability to accept that her child could love more than one maternal figure. The custody evaluation process was grueling.
A court-appointed psychologist interviewed each adult separately, observed interactions between Flynn and both parents, and reviewed records to determine whether my presence was beneficial or harmful. I sat in a sterile office, explaining why I loved my stepson, how I'd tried supporting his relationship with his mother, and whether I understood the difference between a step-parent and a biological parent. Meanwhile, Flynn was forced to answer agonizing questions about loyalty and preference. The evaluation ultimately found no evidence I was harmful. In fact, the psychologist noted that Flynn seemed more anxious when discussing his relationship with me than other life aspects, suggesting he'd been taught to feel conflicted about caring for his stepmother. The court denied Sally's petition and recommended family counseling to help all adults support Flynn's relationships. Winning in court didn't solve the underlying problem. Then, I found the one thing I wasn't supposed to see that changed everything. Flynn had left his journal on the kitchen counter, and it fell open to a page where he'd written about his biggest worry in his careful 11-year-old handwriting. I'm scared that if I love Ilara too much, Mom won't want to be my mom anymore. But I'm also scared that if I don't love Ilara enough, Dad will be sad and she'll leave like Mom left Dad. The entry continued with heartbreaking details about how he tried managing everyone's emotions, showing different levels of affection depending on who was watching. This child was living in constant anxiety, feeling responsible for managing adult relationships and protecting everyone's feelings at the expense of his own emotional authenticity. After reading that, my perspective shifted about what needed to happen, which led to the science fair night that forced everything into the open. I went to Flynn's 6th grade science fair where he was presenting a renewable energy project we'd worked on while Caspian was still en route from work. Sally was already there, but the night was going well as I stayed in the background, trying to be present without creating any appearance of competition. Everything was fine until one judge asked Flynn about his inspiration. Without thinking, he launched into an enthusiastic explanation about how I'd shown him documentaries about climate change, saying, "My mom really helped me understand how important this stuff is for my generation," gesturing toward me with obvious pride and affection. The word mom hung in the air like a bomb. Sally's face went white, then red, then crumbled into pure devastation.
Flynn realized his mistake immediately and looked panic-stricken. Sally excused herself and rushed toward the bathroom. I followed to make sure she was okay and found her sobbing in the hallway. When she saw me, her grief transformed into anger. "How could you let this happen? He's my son. I'm his mother. You can't just take that away from me." I tried explaining I'd never asked Flynn to call me mom, and that it wasn't something we'd planned or encouraged, but Sally was beyond listening.
She accused me of deliberately undermining her relationship, of stealing moments and milestones that belonged to her, and of confusing Flynn about who his real family was, demanding, "He's been calling you mom behind my back, hasn't he? You've been letting him think of you as his mother instead of teaching him that I'm the only one who deserves that title." The accusation was partially true. Flynn had started calling me mom occasionally when we were alone, and I hadn't corrected him because it felt natural and sweet, but I'd never encouraged it or intended for it to happen in front of Sally. I apologized for her pain and tried reassuring her that I understood she was Flynn's mother and nothing would ever change that. But my words only seemed to make her more upset, as if my comfort was further evidence I was trying to take her place. The confrontation lasted about 20 minutes, with Sally alternating between tears and anger, while other parents started to notice. Finally, Caspian arrived and Sally immediately demanded he make me understand I was overstepping boundaries. Caspian tried calming everyone and suggested we talk privately, but Sally wasn't willing to wait. She demanded immediate assurance that I would stop allowing Flynn to call me mom. I found myself agreeing to ask Flynn to use my first name, Elara, instead of mom, especially when his mother was present, just to de-escalate and get us through the rest of his school event. Caspian looked unhappy with this concession but didn't contradict me in front of Sally. We managed to get through the rest of the evening, but the damage was done. Flynn was quiet and subdued, and when we got home, he was furious with me for agreeing to Sally's demand. "Why do you care more about her feelings than about me?" he asked with tears streaming down his face. "I thought you loved me, but now you're saying I can't even call you what feels right because it makes her sad?" Caspian was equally upset, arguing that I'd essentially validated Sally's position that my relationship with Flynn was inappropriate and had taught Flynn his feelings mattered less than adult politics. But I was thinking about that journal entry I'd seen about a little boy who felt responsible for managing everyone's emotions. I wondered if asking him to modify how he addressed me in certain situations was actually protecting him from impossible loyalty conflicts. The conversation went late into the night, but something important had shifted. We couldn't go back to pretending that Sally's insecurity wasn't affecting Flynn's ability to form natural relationships. Here's what actually changed. Caspian called Sally the next day and told her that while he understood her feelings about the mom situation, he wouldn't allow her discomfort to limit Flynn's relationships or force him to hide his affections to protect adult egos. He explained that Flynn calling me mom sometimes was his choice, not something we'd encouraged or required, and that trying to control how he expressed feelings would only create more anxiety and confusion. Caspian offered family counseling sessions that included all of us, but made it clear that any future attempts to legally limit my involvement in Flynn's life would be met with strong opposition. Sally initially resisted, but the previous custody evaluation had made it clear her tactics weren't successful. She reluctantly agreed to try counseling, though she maintained she'd never be comfortable with Flynn calling anyone else mom. The counseling sessions were difficult, but eventually productive. After productive counseling sessions, Sally was able to acknowledge that her fears about being replaced stemmed from her own childhood experiences with divorce and step-parents. Recognizing that projecting those fears onto Flynn wasn't fair to him. I was able to explain that I had never intended to compete with her or minimize her importance in Flynn's life, and I was willing to be more mindful of situations that might trigger her insecurity while still maintaining an authentic relationship with him. Most importantly, Flynn learned that he didn't have to manage adult emotions or hide his feelings to keep peace in the family.
He was allowed to love all of us in whatever way felt natural, and the adults were responsible for working out their own issues without putting him in the middle. Now, 2 years later, the blended family has reached a functional equilibrium. Flynn still calls me mom sometimes, and Alara at other times, depending on the situation and how he's feeling. Sally still gets uncomfortable when he uses the title in front of her, but she no longer makes him feel guilty about it. Caspian and I successfully learned to support Flynn's relationship with his mother while maintaining our own family bonds. The science fair project that triggered the initial crisis won second place in the school district competition, and Flynn was proud that all three of his parents were there to celebrate. We operate as a functional blended family where the child gets to experience multiple sources of love without having to choose. Sally remains Flynn's mother, and I have earned the right to be called whatever feels authentic to him in our relationship, confirming that he calls me mom because he wants to, not because anyone taught him to. I still get chills thinking about finding that journal entry. Flynn is doing so much better now, and watching him finally be a kid, not a family diplomat, was the real victory. It took a nightmare of a custody battle and a painful confrontation to get here, but we found a way to make our blended family work for him. If you've been through anything like this, I want to hear your story. Have you dealt with an ex-partner who just couldn't let go, or an impossible loyalty conflict? Drop a comment below and tell me your favorite moment from this story, or just share your advice. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of our story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.